What Bitcoin Did podcast.
Hello there from Los Angeles. How are you all? Pretty good over here. I'm actually over in West Hollywood, about to record a couple of interviews, which is pretty cool. I also got to see Elton John in concert last night, which was very, very exciting. Also, sorry to be missing out on the Lightning Conference. Everyone there, I hope you're having a good time. Good luck, Starks. I will be definitely checking out online, so good luck with all of that. Anyway, welcome to the What Bitcoin Did podcast, which is brought to you by the Mighty Kraken, the best place to buy and sell Bitcoin. And today I've got a really interesting interview. One of these ones that just kind of come out of the blue and I didn't know what to expect, and it's turned into one of my favorites. I sat down with Paul Puey from Edge Wallet to discuss time preference. But before that, I do have to give you a message from my show sponsors. Okay, so have you checked out my new sponsor, Wire, yet? Why not? If you haven't, you definitely need to go and see the work they're doing. Go and support my buddy Michael Dunworth. Whether you are a solo developer or a large team, if you are looking to simplify user onboarding and offer your users an easy, fast way to purchase Bitcoin, then you've definitely got to talk to Wire. Since 2013, they have focused on taking care of the heavy lifting in terms of compliance, payments, liquidity, so you can focus on building your core offering. If you think you've got an idea for the next killer app, don't let the regulators screw it up for you. If you want to find out more, reach out to Wire or create a developer account at sendwire.com, which is SENDWYRE.com. Also, my badass sponsor, Dropbit. Just had a couple of really cool announcements. Lightning is now available on the app, and they've also got support for Bech32 addresses. I was doing a giveaway this week. I was sending out Bitcoin to lots of people. I was sending out batches of 25,000 sats, and they ended up breaking the app. But that's fixed now, so I'm going to be sending those out again later. I'm going to try and get as many people as I can into Lightning. I'm going to try and get as many sats as I can out there. The implementation is so good. You've got to go and check it out. The UX for moving between your Bitcoin and Lightning wallet is probably one of the best I've seen. And on top of that, you can text Bitcoin to people, you can tweet Bitcoin to people. Dropbit is the wallet you need to check out for you Bitcoiners. It is available on the iPhone and Android. Just head over to dropbit.app, which is DROPBIT.app. Okay, so on to the show with Paul, who is the CEO and co-founder of Edge. And when I first was discussing the idea of this interview, the background was in health, and I was really interested in discussing that because, health was my introduction to Bitcoin. But this was one of these interviews where I didn't have the questions prepped. I just wanted to sit and talk and just get to know Paul. And yeah, it's one of those interviews that comes out really well. I'm really, really happy with it. Especially when Paul starts getting into time preference, something that's become a lot more relevant to me. Like I've learned a lot more about since getting into Bitcoin. What's it like for you, though? How do you prioritize your now versus your future? Instant versus delayed gratification? I think it's easy to think about it in terms of money. Why would you be inclined to keep hold of paper bills that are inflationary and printed at will when they're going to lose value right in front of your eyes? However, Bitcoin is the antithesis of this. Supply is dropping. It is the soundest and hardest money ever. So, of course, this favors a low time preference. And this is why things like stacking sats are so popular. But time preference outside of money is also very interesting. Whether it's diet, free time, or the content you consume, there's always a trade-off between the current and future self. I don't always agree with some people's views on modern art. That seems to come into time preference. I disagree. I'm a big fan of Rothko. Sorry, Maximus. Sorry, Saifedean. But anyway, this is exactly what Paul and I got into in the interview. We discussed how time preference works, whether it's Bitcoin, health and diet, journalism, even getting into Libertarianism. So I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. If you've got any questions, you can reach out to me. I am going to be in LA for the next couple of days and then heading off to San Fran on Monday for the day to record a very, very special interview, which is pretty exciting. And then I'm off to New York for the Human Rights Foundation Freedom Forum. Also, have you checked out Defiance? If you checked out my new podcast, Defiance, please do. It's available now on every single platform. Thanks for all the feedback so far. Anyway, on to the interview. If you've got any questions, do reach out to me. My email is hello@whatbitcoindid.com. All right, man. Well, welcome. Good to have you on the podcast.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So let's go way back.
Way back.
Way back where this all started, because I know part of the story, but I want to hear about it from you. I want to get into details with it for you. So let's do that.
So how did it all start?
Yeah, the Bitcoin journey.
The Bitcoin journey, I guess it kind of starts from way before Bitcoin. Started from when I had been working in Silicon Valley. So I was one of the lead developers over at NVIDIA, ironically, before they were a mining company, when they were actually still a graphics card company. You used them for games and whatnot. And I went through what was the first of, I think, kind of my experience with the healthcare system. And I broke down from overuse, work, repetitive strain, the kind of typical injuries you hear about from software engineers. And I had, at the time, sought kind of conventional medical advice. It's what the insurance tells you to do. It's what coworkers, what companies say, okay, here's what you do, right? Whether it be injecting yourself with anti-inflammatories, taking painkillers, wearing wrist braces, did all that and really had no success. And it actually, even after 7-8 years and a childhood of really wanting to be an engineer and developer, it forced me to leave and have to completely shift careers.
So this is a common thing with engineers. I'm not aware of this.
It's to some degree it's common, and it's it's happened to people that I've met in just in life, whether they be engineers or just workers that use tools that are very repetitive. Right? It's repetitive strain. It's really it's somewhat common.
But is it also posture? Sat at a desk.
Ironically, it's funny because I went through the most ergonomic evaluation you could imagine. I had the most expensive chair, fit at the right height, with my feet at the right angle, and the monitor at the right height of my eyes, and it made no difference.
Interesting.
And the funny thing is, I had a coworker, and he was like 60 years old, and he's never had problems, and he's been a software engineer his life. Now, granted, there's some aspect of just your genes, right? Your capacity to kind of have this problem. But he said, one of my secrets is I'm never comfortable at my desk. And every time you walk into his cube, he's got one leg over the armrest. He's typing sideways. He's slouched over. He's upright. And the key was actually change.
Yeah.
It wasn't about doing the same thing in the perfect position over and over again. It was about changing, and no one tells you that.
Well, so I suffer with back problems, and it's been going on for a long time now. My chiropractor has got it down to my posture when typing. Mm-hmm. And his encouragement for me is to keep moving. And he's actually got me to the point now. So I spend a lot of time when I'm at home with my laptop on the tabletop in the kitchen.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's at the perfect height, and I stand. I spent half the day standing. But he said, whatever you do, keep moving. So if you stood for 40 minutes, then sit for 40 minutes, and then have a break. You
got it. That's exactly it. And this was when I got hurt. This was in the early 2000s, and no one gave that advice. They didn't say keep changing. They just said get in the perfect position and use these kind of expensive tools and wrist braces, and that'll kind of fix it or alleviate the problem. And it never did. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until kind of experiencing what I'd call the alternative advice and seeing places like chiropractic offices and different chiropractors and physical therapists, which countered what a lot of the kind of Western medical doctors would say, that things really started to change and things started to improve. That's kind of where I'd say things started. Obviously, from the viewpoint of cryptocurrency, my history as a technologist helped me understand cryptocurrency. But the real start of my interest in it was from experiencing what is kind of given as truth by the largest establishments in the world, telling us this is the way you do things, and realizing that a lot of that either doesn't work for most people, if not everyone, or it's a lie, or that it's a lie that's actually motivated by a lot of a financial gain.
Right. Were you born in the US?
I know. I was actually born in the Philippines.
Philippines. What age were you when you moved over?
I was 5.
You're 5, okay.
Yeah, I came over at 5. So for the most part, I'm American. Like I've been and visited the Philippines a whole bunch. My parents were from there, but I think that was the main reason why they moved over here. Was I watched all the kind of entertainment and Hollywood of the U.S. when I was growing up, and was fascinated by it, and came over and experienced the real Disneyland and Universal Studios as a kid, and of course enjoyed it. But I was kind of raised as an American, you could say. Yeah,
well, my kids are the same. They've been out here 3 times. They've been out to New York. They love it. They see America's bright lights.
They do. It's hard to deny that its effect on the world. Mm-hmm. But I've had like these weird greater insights as to why it's been so effective and why it is so appealing, and how it appeals to our human psyche in ways that kind of other countries haven't been able to. And it all ties in actually with the learnings that I've had in health and wellness, and to a degree in crypto, the financial system, and rooted in kind of our desire to kind of optimize things and optimize our time, optimize kind of enjoyment, and even sometimes at the compromise of quality of life.
Yeah.
And we don't have the necessarily greatest, well, we don't experience war directly and that type of violence, but we don't necessarily have the greatest quality of life, especially on a health perspective, because our time preference in the US is such that we prefer things to be fast, immediate today, and we don't realize the long-term effects. Mm-hmm. That's so true in many ways of society and our world and our personality, especially in developed countries.
Well, I have a really evolving relationship with America and a really changing opinion of it. We'll probably get into a bunch of this. And this is just from coming over so much. I mean, it's like my 50th, 60th time to America. I've been so many times. Well, I'm coming like once or twice a month at the moment, just coming back and forth all the time. I'm starting to understand politics a bit more. I'm starting to understand how the systems work. And there are things I really like and things I really don't like, but they're changing over time. It's a very strange
nothing's
thing.
static.
Yeah.
Nothing's static.
So talk me a bit through what happened with the health system and kind of the impact it had on you.
Yeah, so through that injury and a few different others, I had various joint pains and whatnot, and I remember even to a silly degree, in my attempt I'm kind of a workaholic in all honesty, and so I just mashed through it all, wrecking myself. And at the pinnacle of this, embarrassing I would say, I literally would click a mouse on the floor with my feet and use voice dictation software to write code, which, while it might not be a bad idea to write an email, it is a bad idea to try to write code, and strained my voice actually, where I couldn't talk for about 9 months, or at least it really hurt to do so.
So, but if you're doing that, surely you're at the point where you should be in bed rest.
Bed rest is basically away from that job and career. Right. So I had left, and that's when I sought the attention of kind of the alternate types of healthcare. Okay. And that's when things started to get better. But I actually went into a different lifestyle. I stopped being an engineer and technologist. I was always following the industry, but then actually started operating small business. I operated everything from a restaurant, bar, nightclub to a climbing gym. So I actually was an instructor at a climbing gym and did outdoor guiding. And that's what I kind of reinvigorated the life that I had in me through just being kind of a good, healthy person again.
That's a massive change, though.
It's a huge change. And it was, for a long time, a sad change. And I remember going to some kind of employee gatherings with old folks that I worked with at NVIDIA saying, God, that's such a waste. And I'm like, ouch. Because they knew that I was a very strong, talented, and dedicated, driven engineer. And to see me go into kind of what they would see as smaller business, to them felt like it was a waste of my abilities.
But are they thinking that you're missing out on your potential
Silicon
profits,
Valley,
the shares,
experiencing shares, Silicon Valley, reputation in that space? But to me, it was invigorating to that change. And
more enjoyable job, more enjoyable life.
It was a healthier lifestyle. It also felt like I was understanding more about how the world worked, and it also opened me up to some of the challenges and lies that are kind of created in our world, right? Starting from healthcare into nutrition, like how you should eat, how you should take care of yourself, and then crypto being kind of the completing of that circle.
And probably also a career where you were dealing more with people on a personal basis.
Far more personal basis, understanding them not as the consumers of a product, which is a very, very enlightening place to be. And they were much more close to you as opposed to being multiple degrees separated from you on an interactivity level. It also helped me from the viewpoint, I still went back into tech as I am now today, but it helped from the viewpoint of being on the other side of the technology that I would use. In working in small business, I was that person that did accounting, worked with payment system, point of sale, PCI compliance, for Christ's sake, with credit cards, and dealt with the 300 question forms of how you as a small business are going to become PCI compliant. And then you realize you have to check 60% of the answers with not applicable, otherwise we'd go out of business. Yeah. And suddenly you passed. That was like, all right, great. You can now continue operation, even though you've had to check a bunch of these things as not applicable. And so being on that other side of the technology was much more opening, as opposed to just being the guy in the cube writing the code and getting stuff out there, not really seeing what it's like to use the technology. And so that was a major shift, just like you said, for sure, a major shift in me. But I think that so much more well defines who I am and what I care about today versus someone that was just, if I were just writing code for 30 years.
And it was climbing schools? Climbing gyms?
I worked at a climbing gym. I did outdoor guiding, climbing guiding, and then worked at small businesses like restaurants, bars, nightclubs. Literally just everything that you wouldn't expect someone coming out of Silicon Valley to do. but I enjoyed the change. It was definitely a needed change at that time in my life. And I didn't think I would ever go back to tech.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've had a complete career change in the last couple of years. I worked in advertising in London, and I was overweight and taking too many drugs and drinking and working long hours. I still work long hours now, but this is a complete change. It's become, I don't know, I enjoy this a lot more now. So I understand where you can get sucked into a career. Mm-hmm. You just do it year on year without even thinking about it. You don't see an escape, and then one is forced upon you, and then you realize, why didn't I do this before?
Yep. And I like I said, I didn't think I would get back into it. And during that time, I started going further down the rabbit hole with, what you'd kind of mentioned was healthcare and cancer, and diabetes, and learning and understanding how the healthcare and big pharmaceutical industries work.
Which is very different here in the US than the UK. I tell you the
one
thing.
I don't understand the UK so much. So I'd love to understand it a little bit better, but I understand to some degree what it's like in the US and how closely it ties in with government and FDA.
Well, I mean, there's probably similarities and differences. And the big difference I notice coming back and forth is when I watch TV and I'm watching cable and there's adverts. So you have so many adverts for some kind of pharmaceutical product.
Right.
More often than not, I've never heard of the condition. I've never heard of the treatment. And I'm always kind of blown away and trying not to giggle with the very fast-spoken warning at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
Which goes on for
side effects of one kind of sickness and vomiting, diarrhea, limp,
depression,
exactly,
may lead to suicide.
Yeah, exactly.
But that kind of blows me away, and it almost. I know this is cynical, but it feels to me they're almost pushing you to feel like you've got conditions that you don't have because they just want to sell drugs.
Oh, absolutely. When I had two family members of mine and a pet, although however big of a deal you think of a pet passing away, kind of really opened my eyes to a handful of different conditions and then how the drug industry targets those conditions. A grandmother with diabetes, a father with a heart condition who died of cancer, and then cancer from a pet. And all three of those, especially the heart condition or heart disease, cancer, and diabetes, I looked into pretty carefully and looked at what was highly recommended out of the industry and what was put onto them to treat them and other family members that have come across it. And that kind of runs rampant in my family. And like a classic point example of one of the big lies that kind of crosses our world. And me saying this will probably get a lot of haters saying like, oh, he's a kook. He's believing the people that are selling snake oil. But the entire lie of, for example, cholesterol. Like during the 60s, 70s, like meat, eggs, anything that had cholesterol, butter, were lauded as like, we're going to kill you, right? They were going to create huge high cholesterol levels and you're going to die of a heart attack. And if we detect that you have high cholesterol levels, we have to prescribe statins for you, which, oh, by the way, in the small fine footprint, you can't go off of them. Once you're on them, you need to take them for life.
So how much of this is lies and how much of this is bad science? I
would say it starts off with bad science. And at some point, in a way, the lies go away because they don't even realize that they're a lie.
Right.
You just take them for truth. And even the doctors don't know anymore. It's just what you're told. And as a doctor, there's a lot of stuff to learn. There's a lot of good doctors. I don't even blame them anymore. There's so much to learn. You read the textbooks, you take them for truth, because why should they lie is what your understanding would be.
And, if you're doing a 7-year medical degree, you don't have the time to validate every single condition and treatment. You're being taught.
Exactly. You got to make money and pay the bill that you have from the giant loans you took to go to medical school.
Of course.
You can't evaluate everything, and you're learning a lot in that period of time. And so it takes a few unique people to go and actually challenge some of the truths. There was a great story of Dr. Richard Bernstein. He was diagnosed with diabetes, and he started to understand, well, what exactly is diabetes and what causes it? He had been recommended by the doctors, okay, from diabetes, yes, it is a problem with being able to process glucose and other carbohydrates, but stick with the unrefined whole wheat type of carbohydrates, and that'll help. Oh, by the way, here's some drugs to lower insulin response.
So Lucky Charms and drugs.
See, Lucky Charms and drugs. Or Cheerios and drugs. But he took a much more scientific analysis. He started researching it. And, this is kind of obviously the root behind my own personal diet being relatively low carb. He started studying it and found it doesn't matter what type of carbohydrates you intake, you're going to spike insulin levels. And he had tried to convince his doctors, yes, I pretty confident I can do this and cure myself. And he said, no, keep taking the drugs. And after, I believe, about 5-10 years, they couldn't find any sign of diabetes in him. But no one would listen to him. He literally, starting at the age of, I believe, 47, he went and got an MD.
Wow.
Just so that he could publish a book with the title MD at the end of it to show people how to actually fight diabetes.
What's his name?
Richard Bernstein. And so this is another case in point to, we're told one thing, but no one really takes the time to understand whether or not there's, like you said, either bad science or a lie behind it. And the motivation to sell a ton of the different pharmaceutical quote unquote solutions, which are really the band-aids on top of these conditions, are what fundamentally I feel like motivate the lie or the bad science. Because for someone to go and just eat differently doesn't make a lot of money. There's just not a lot of money to be made in doing so.
I mean, grains have been a massive part of when you see like the food pyramid.
Correct.
Huge part of the food pyramid. And also I watched a documentary on Netflix with the flood of high fructose corn syrup into the diet. Was this to do with, I don't know too much about it, but is this to do with like the optimization of farming? So
the United States, in its rise to supremacy, its biggest advantage is marketing. All the way down to Silicon Valley, US has amazing, amazing marketing for everything that they do, whether it's true or false. And one of the things that the US is really, really bad at doing is growing sugar. Where do you see any sugar grown in the US other than its tiny little island of Hawaii? But it's really, really damn good at growing corn. It just kind of grows like a weed at this point. So it proliferated the story of, well, corn sugar is, high fructose corn sugar is a fine alternative sweetener, and pushed that even to areas that actually grew sugar very naturally. And even corn oil, it pushed as being the healthy fat, disregarding the fact that it has a ton of trans fats, which I think is pretty widely known to be an unhealthy. Like everyone has agreed at least on that, the trans fats are bad. But they've pushed that narrative to the point where even my family that grew up in the Philippines, surrounded by coconut trees with coconut oil, known as being one of the healthiest oils on earth. Not only for consumption, but also as an oil for your skin, everything, removing skin problems, exactly what you said. And they grew up, noticed as the U.S. started to occupy the Philippines, especially during World War II, that the narrative started changing, and they started buying overpriced imported corn oil and not cooking with coconut oil.
That's crazy.
But that's what they were told, and the narrative was so convincing, right? It's easy to make great marketing ads around this clear, clean-looking oil that's healthier for you versus this clogged-looking, coconut oil which turns white and solid and that'll clog your arteries. In a way, it, on a visual level, it sounds like it makes sense, and they really captured that lie and pushed it and sold a ton of product around the world to places that didn't need it. And it's quite interesting also because there's been a big movement with Bitcoiners in this carnivory thing. Totally. And at first I was like, what are you guys on about? I mean, and I've done every diet. I was a vegetarian for 16 years. I did 2 years as a vegan, which, by the way, we'll come back to it. Actually, was probably when I felt my healthiest. And you can, yes. But interestingly, it was the time where I wasn't working and I was cooking every single meal, fresh veg. Yep. I got in great shape. I was running. My friend Rich Roll has a podcast. He's very successful and he's a vegan. And I was great. But when I went back to work and I didn't have the time to cook every meal fresh, I was having, microwave vegan meals and substitute vegan meals. And then I felt terrible. I felt really, really bad. And I went and had a steak. I remember going to have the steak. I was actually in San Francisco. So with my kids, I said, I'm going to have a steak. And I instantly felt better. I instantly felt like I had something in me that made me feel better. I've actually been trying to cut out carbohydrates. So I pretty much, apart from I think one bag of chips, I've not had any carbohydrates now in 2 weeks. And one of the strange experiences from this, which you'll probably understand, is that I can have a huge steak. I can feel full, but my mind is saying something to me. It's like, you need the sugar. You need the sugar, like an addiction. You want it, and sugar triggers the same addiction nerves in the brain as cocaine. Like they've analyzed the brain, and it's like the same parts light up. Right. And so that's been one of those challenging things. Like, as an alcoholic, do you occasionally have a drink? No, you cut it out completely. And so I have 100% cut out sugar from my diet for 6 years. So I was into keto when it was what the doctors would say you're crazy to do. At an era when Bitcoin was crazy, right? This no one had heard of. It's kind of the hot, cool, like Silicon Valley diet now. But when I'd started that in 2013, people thought it was nuts. They'd never heard of it.
Do you substitute your sugar at all? Do you use sweeteners?
Only if I'm making something that I want to be able to eat and other people as well.
Okay.
So I try to stay away from that addiction factor of just the sweetness as a whole.
Okay.
And it's amazing what after 3 weeks or a month, you start to just be accustomed to it. And you like the taste of sweetness now feels almost a bit alienating.
Okay.
Like you feel less comfortable with sweet things. It's definitely not something I think everyone can kind of adapt to, and we are surrounded by sugar. And as humans, we crave it because it's an energy source. Mm-hmm. It's a very efficient energy source, rooting back to our desire for efficiency. There's a great book, Born to Run, that I highly recommend. I don't know if you've read it.
So I did the audiobook. So back when I was a vegan,
I did it too, yeah.
Yeah. So back when I was a vegan, I was running. So one of the other things, my running got a lot better. So I got down when I first started running, from a 1 hour 10K to a 47-minute 10K.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And
that's the best I ever ran, was a 47-minute 10K. Right?
Yeah, but that was my peak. And then my back went from that we spoke about earlier. Yep. But what I was doing audiobooks, going out running, and Born to Run was one of the ones I did.
You're right. Oh, awesome. Cool. Yeah, it's it's even though it doesn't align with the whole keto and whatnot, and they were vegans, I think, that were talked about. The interesting insight that I got from that book was the desire for our species to really be efficient. Mm-hmm. That was what I really extracted. Everything from the way we run, like you probably remember this, the way we run compared to like a cheetah, where they can only sprint and then they stop. The way we both love running and are good at it, but also don't want to.
Hold on, is it because I did a bunch of books at that time, these audiobooks. Was this the one where they found the tribe that were really, they could run for miles? Yeah, miles
Hundreds
and
of miles.
And they were really fast, and they had that crazy race.
Yep, exactly. That is the book.
Yeah, that book's unbelievable.
Yeah, one of the best books. And I also listened to the audiobook while I was, I think, driving through on a road trip through California into the the redwoods and whatnot.
Yeah.
But no, I love that book. And that insight into humanity's desire for efficiency is what I've basically applied and understood. It helps me understand what drives in so many different industries. Everything from tech to our desire for the quick fix in healthcare. That's why drugs are so popular, is that we don't want to take the long-term solution. We want to take the quick, because we drive for efficiency and optimization, which is why we build technology. And technology is layers of building blocks and optimizations, which ironically also, if you think about it from the viewpoint of cryptocurrency, is one of the reasons why as humans, we actually kind of desire trust. We desire a level of trust because it helps us optimize. We don't want to have to make all the decisions ourselves. Like making every decision you want in life is actually really kind of painstaking. Mm-hmm. That's why we create, to the unfortunate detriment in some ways of society, why we create government. Is I elect you because I want you to make some decisions for me because I'm too busy feeding the kids and going to work. Right? Now you do a bad job, then I'm going to have to re-elect someone else. But in the end, I don't want to make your decisions over and over for every single bill that passes your plate. I don't want, or table. I don't want to make those decisions. But that desire for us to delegate out, and they even say that, right? They say in business, delegate. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what we're doing. Unfortunately, we're delegating out, and by doing that, in some cases, is an optimization and it's efficiency, but in some cases, it's a giving up of power. And when the entity that we delegate out, kind of takes advantage of that and becomes a misguided entity, then we have the corruption that ensues in all of the different industries that we've seen it happen. Yeah,
this time preference thing is really interesting. It's one of these side benefits of Bitcoin in that essentially we've learned to have patience with Bitcoin. Really, mm-hmm. You're on a 4-year cycle each time. You should be buying and selling every day unless you're a professional trader.
Right.
And this term time preference just keeps coming up. Safer Dean talks about it with regards to his books. You've mentioned it here. And I don't think Satoshi designed Bitcoin to teach us about time preference across our whole life, but it's now a topic of conversation.
Right. And it's the challenge that we've had that has created I think almost every single instance of corruption is because we typically have a time preference that prefers short-term gain in every facet of life. And that is kind of the rooted challenge. And it's true, Bitcoin forces for once to really think with a longer time preference. And it gives us an opportunity that many kind of individuals, not professional traders or investors, accredited investors, haven't had an opportunity to be a part of. Like,
it's funny, and I haven't even thought about it right to this level of detail, but essentially, Bitcoin's often known for its slow block times. You know, the 10-minute block times, 6 confirmations could take an hour. Lots of people complain about it, but with that, you get higher levels of security.
Right.
There are other cryptocurrencies who are trying to be fast, 10,000 TPS, a million TPS, whatever it is, and that's a different time preference. They're trying to solve a problem, but the Bitcoiners stay happy, pretty happy, with their 10-minute block times, their 1 hour, so their 6 confirmations. And I guess it's just taught us to slow down a little bit, just be a little bit more patient, you know, and you can relate that to other things. Do I order a pizza, or do I go and buy the ingredients and make myself a dinner?
Right.
You know, do I smoke or do I not smoke? You know,
right, exactly.
Do I take out a loan to buy something I can't afford and have interest, or do I wait until I can afford it? It's like all these different side benefits from essentially taking control of your time preference.
Right. That is one of the major benefits, is it's opening us and our mindset to changing in time preference. One of the challenge is, can we be successful given the way humanity is rooted in that short term, I want something right now, fast style of time preference? And where does the balance lie? I'm astrologically a Libra, so balance is key to me.
Right.
And there's no extreme one end or the other. And so while I love the concept of this, let's take things slow, old, beautiful, like architectures of the old world and that lifestyle, I realize that there is a large portion of humanity that wants things to be fast and efficient, and we have to kind of deliver that. Where do we find that balance in between that helps us accomplish both the goals while still delivering it and getting it adopted? And this is one of the biggest challenges I think our industry has, is where do you find the balance in it? And this as well applies in all the other industries of healthcare and pharmaceuticals. How do we get people to say that, yes, there's probably some balance there on improving your lifestyle, where you don't have to quit everything that you do and become a monk, you know, somewhere in the middle of Asia. Right? Don't have to go that far, but at the same time, don't be taking out fast food every single day. Where can you make those little subtle steps and shift your time preference while not going completely to one extreme? And that balance is rooted in everything from the successful entrepreneur that says, how much am I going to do versus how much am I going to delegate? And I'm excited to see where we end up with that balance in this cryptocurrency world. With other major shifts, such as in like the internet, we see where that came to its balance. And a lot of people they argue the internet failed. Like, oh, we've got these behemoths that control the internet. I tend to be a bit more positive about that. You know, we're in a world now where I can digitally send a message to anyone anywhere in the world. I couldn't do that before. Now, they might not be able to discover my message because it's controlled by the gatekeepers of the YouTubes and the Googles of the world. Mm-hmm. But if I wanted to bypass them, I could. That I'm curious as to what that's going to look like in cryptocurrency.
But these are evolutionary steps.
They are, yeah.
You know, the internet hasn't failed. It's just gone through, or it's continually going through a process of learning what it is and you know how people interact with it. You know, it was originally all content was pretty much free, because any attempts to charge, people wouldn't pay because there's an alternative at the click of a button. So it went through a model of advertising based. Mm-hmm. I think that's been proven to be a false model. I think it's very hard to sell advertising.
It's hard unless you're huge.
Yes.
So I think definitely if you're huge, it's proven to be a very successful model.
If you're YouTube.
If you're Twitter, if you're Facebook, and there's some even smaller companies, but still fairly large.
But even Twitter has struggled on the ad model.
It has struggled, but it has at least survived long enough and has created a compelling enough product where people are paying for advertising on there.
Yeah.
How successful the advertising is, hard to say. We've never actually done any advertising on Twitter, so don't quite understand yet. But it's definitely very hard for what you'd call the average smaller, medium-sized company. And so it basically eliminates any of those companies from really being successful on that specific model.
I think it's also affected journalism.
Oh, hugely, of course.
Have you seen Andreas's presentation on fake news?
I haven't seen that one. I've definitely seen a couple dozen of his presentation. That one I haven't seen, but I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah, it's a really good one because he just talks about the fact that we went from a stage where we would pay for our news, whether it was, you know, traditionally a newspaper, to the content being free online, and therefore get into the world of clickbait competition, and therefore that has created fake news. And I think that is a problem, and we've also got to that point now where a lot of media has become very politically aligned as well. I mean, it's hilarious. I was watching about the Trump impeachment the other day. I read about it on Fox News, and then I read about it on MSNBC, and it was almost entirely two different stories.
Right.
And this has become a problem, and it's going to become a real problem with journalism, I think.
It's become much, much more opinionated and less objective over the years. And you realize that, well, there simply is money behind a lot of the media outlets. They're huge. They have a lot of influence. They then can be bought. And just even people inside of the media outlets themselves have strong opinions and are aligned with certain political parties. Not something that I definitely wouldn't deny. Hard to say what effectively is going to fix that, because really, if you kind of think about it from this unfortunate free market type of opinion, if what they do generates money, they're going to just keep doing it again.
Yep.
So how do you fight that? What really is the solution to fighting that? I personally don't believe in fighting that with kind of a regulatory battle. That's kind of not my at heart opinion. I think removing some of those barriers and making it easy for other people to post and have access to the demographic, the world, the people, and bring in healthy competition would be the best hope of fighting that. Much like I think that having other entities that can more easily compete with large, big pharma companies and making the barrier to entry smaller would help eliminate some of that corruption. But it's definitely a challenging problem.
Yeah.
Because we're so ingrained in it. We're so used to the brand names. The marketing is so strong. Like, we know the names that we think we trust.
Yeah, so I've stopped watching mainstream news now. I mean, very occasionally I'll watch the BBC or Sky News when I'm in the UK, but I've kind of stopped watching it. I start to enjoy a little bit more of the independent news. I mean, someone like Joe Rogan he could command an audience bigger than major TV networks. And he isn't really politically swayed. He doesn't have to. He'll have his own bias, of course.
Right.
But he will bring people on and try and have a balanced conversation, try and look at both sides. And I think that's kind of interesting because, he could have one week, he could have somebody like Alex Jones on. The next week, he could have Andrew Yang.
Right.
I find that a lot more interesting these days.
Yep, I do too as well. Going back to why I think that isn't hitting what you'd call the same type of viewership as mainstream media is that it's slower. Mm-hmm. It's part news, part entertainment.
Yep.
And you dive a bit deeper into someone. You dive into their character, their soul. Like when he goes into an interview, you're not just getting the headlines of this person, you're getting their persona. And that just takes more time. And there's an interesting analogy that I've made that made people go, oh my God, is this why humanity is kind of so bad? That desire to kind of optimize. If you think about it, why do you choose to kind of work with somebody as a whole, like in business or become friends with them? Frequently it's because there might be a reference to somebody, like someone that you know, that you trust, that, hey, I think you check out this guy's project or get to know them. They're a good person.
That's why we're sat here right now.
Exactly, yeah. We have a reference from a common person. And that reference sounds kind of genuine. That's a good way to operate. But what happens if you take that to its really furthest extreme and your parents, as an example, growing up in some part of the world or country, say that, you should not associate with a certain type of person of a certain color of skin because maybe they had a bad experience. Does that kind of create that extreme negative of what we now call as racism? Because if you grow up and you've been told not to associate with a certain color of skin, you could go and deep dive each individual you talk to and learn their persona, spend hours like Joe Rogan does, and spend hours to understand who they really are and break past the stereotype. Or you could optimize and say, well, that's what I've heard, so therefore I won't bother. And once again, it goes right back to the darn time preference over and over again. But you're right, Joe Rogan's content is great, balanced, covers a lot of swaths of our world. But it's slow. It might not be absolutely current because he schedules his interviews, and if something immediately happens today, you might not hear about it on Joe Rogan for a while.
No.
And so he doesn't get the same clickbait of, oh, I want to know what just happened. I heard about this from my buddy. Where can I search for it? Well, it's not going to be found on Joe Rogan.
But what he does do that's really cool, he has the continuation of stories. So he could have a range of guests over the space of, say, a month. If in the previous month something had happened, say, with Antifa, that might be covered in 3 or 4 podcasts. So in some ways, he's got this... it isn't like each interview is independent. There's like an evolving story, and he's coming in with different people's perspectives. Now, sometimes they jump around. So if he's, he might have someone from House of Pain, and they'll just talk a lot about MMA, and then maybe they'll talk about cannabis. But then he might have Andrew Yang on and talk about Antifa and cannabis. But these stories thread between the guests.
Exactly.
And I actually find that really interesting because you do get all these different perspectives on the same topics. And they are usually fair and balanced. And I've just enjoyed it a lot more as a way of being made aware of content or stories, but not being, like I say, if I follow the impeachment of Donald Trump on Fox News, it is fake news.
Right.
There's no story here. If I follow on MSNBC, he's going to be impeached and he should be lose his presidency. So I don't want that kind of news anymore.
Well, in a way, the word news comes from new. And so the desire for mainstream media to report things as absolutely new as possible forces them to say, well, we're not going to deep dive into it much at all. No. We're just going to report it. First thing that could be said about it, interview the first person you come across that has any insight into it and just push that out. And therefore, someone that's searching because they heard about it from a buddy will find your click and you'll get some revenue from it. And so maybe it's a desire for us to not necessarily go to mainstream media news anymore, but just stay away from news as a word. We should stop caring about what's actually new.
The 24-hour
like
entertainment.
It's almost wait, don't listen to anything that you've heard of for the first 48 hours. And allow the reporters and the podcasters, the people who will actually care to make a bit more of a deep dive about it, allow them to start reporting on it before you even bother.
Yeah, and waste your time. Stressing, because it can also stress you out. I mean, it's like he keeps saying is that we've never had so much stuff. We've never been so wealthy. We've never had it so good. Yet everyone is angry and pissed off. And I blame a lot of the media for that. And I blame a lot of the news for that because it is becoming divisive. If you have this opinion over there, you're wrong, let's fight. And the counter argument is, oh no, but you're wrong, let's fight. And I think it's typified by what happens with the Proud Boys and Antifa up in Portland, where they're just smashing the crap out of each other. And it's just got ridiculous. Well,
it makes for clicks. And I mean, same thing as we see, I'm sure you're aware of in Twitter. The fights make for a whole lot more visibility. Mm-hmm. And the middle ground isn't popular. The just fair, balanced, less subjective and more objective opinion just doesn't make for good entertainment. And really, it's entertainment, actually. If you think about it, in the end, that's all it is.
I've been in the middle of some of that before a lot, actually, a number of times. I'm trying my best these days just to keep away from it because it actually saps your energy.
Oh, it does. You just feel drained at the end of the day. And you're just oh, God.
And someone can say one thing, it can ruin your whole day. Just make you feel really shit. Some guy yesterday, he tweeted, he saw a picture of me. He's like, oh, you got a tattoo of a rose on your hand and a picture of a lady. Oh, what was
one of those guys?
What a cliche. And I was like, well, hold on a second. This is a Maureen Rose. That's my mum's name. She died. I got it after she died. And this is a photo of Bridget Bardot by Terry O'Neill, which is my favorite ever photo. But he's not just
seeing that.
No, and he's just making you feel he's just trying to make you feel like
it's
shit.
Stereotype. You're a guy with a beard and black shirt and tattoos all over. And there's a stereotype of that, and he's applying that versus understanding a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
As to what really makes someone tick.
Next up, I talked to Paul more about time preference, but before that, I do have a message from my amazing sponsors. God, I love these guys. Okay, first up, Kraken, the mighty, mighty Kraken, the most trusted place to buy and sell Bitcoin. Are you using Kraken yet? If not, why? They have the best security, they've got the most comprehensive tools available for traders, and they're hiring some of the most badass people in the industry. Yes, they got Dan Held recently. Now Pierre Rochard's joined the company. I'm going to be meeting up with him in New York to talk about Bitcoin, which is pretty cool. But if you are a trader, with Kraken, you've got Kraken.com, the best place to buy and sell Bitcoin. You've got margin trading with up to 5x leverage. They've got futures, they've got indices, they've got the Kraken OTC desk for you mega whales with your large trades. They've got Crypto Watch, where you can trade on multiple exchanges from a single platform. And for you advanced traders out there, they have the best account management service in the business. There is no better place for traders. Join me in supporting Kraken by heading over to Kraken.com, which is Kraken.com. Also, today's show is brought to you by the amazing BlockFi, a company that is absolutely crushing it. We're bringing Bitcoin and financial services together. They've got two primary products. They've got their crypto loans and their crypto interest accounts, which I'm a customer of. Have you tested out the crypto interest accounts? Because if you are interested, they've had some very cool changes recently. They've dropped minimum deposits. So interest account holding clients will no longer have to meet a minimum deposit amount in their Bitcoin, Ether, or GUSD balances to start earning interest. Also, BlockFi has removed the early withdrawal penalty from the account and is now offering one free withdrawal per client per month. Add to this the announcement of BlockFi Flex, where you can get interest payment in the currency of your choice. BlockFi are absolutely crushing it with these interest accounts. If you're interested in finding out more, definitely do your own research and then head over to blockfi.com, which is BLOCKFI.com. We went way off from the drug stuff. What a bunch of tangents. I actually do want to go back though, because you talked about the diabetes and there's two types of diabetes.
Yeah, type 1, type 2. Yeah.
Type 2 is the
adult onset.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That is the one, did Richard Bernstein cure himself?
That's the one that he did.
That's
correct.
Pretty incredible. You can't cure yourself of type 1. That's a genetic condition.
Yeah, it's genetic. You get it as a kid. Now, you could mitigate it. And so it kind of depends on what you define as a cure. If you could live a normal lifestyle without drugs and eating food that you enjoy, is that a cure? Or are you constantly in quote unquote medication? So like, where do you draw that line? What exactly does it mean to be cured?
Well, so I wanted to talk to you about cancer, and I guess we're going to also get onto heart disease. And I think a common thread is going to be diet.
Yeah, a lot of it will be.
So obviously I lost my mum to cancer 3 years in January, and she survived 2.5 years after being diagnosed stage 3B or 3C, I can't remember, which is, when you look at the prognosis for stage 3B, 3C, it's 2.5 years is a long time. Mm-hmm. Some people are cured, some people aren't, blah, blah, blah. But so there's a couple of things that really stood out to me. Firstly, I really had a problem with chemotherapy, and I don't know why. It just scared the crap out of me, and all the research I did scared the crap out of me. And if I got cancer, I know that's what the doctors would recommend, but I just feel like I wouldn't want to do it. Did you look into chemotherapy at all?
So for my dad, it wasn't an option due to heart condition.
Okay.
So he had both a heart condition and chemotherapy, and he was hospitalized for his heart condition a few years back. But chemotherapy wasn't an option at the time for him.
Right.
So we didn't, and he was also, I think he was almost like stage 4 at the time. So it went very, very fast for him.
Did he change his diet? Because I'll tell you what happened with my mum. She read everything. She was incredible. So she went vegan, which is why I went vegan. I did it with her. She cut sugar out. She cut alcohol out. She actually cut most meat out, went with fish. 6 months before she died, she looked the best she'd looked in 10 years. Yes, obviously on the inside the cancer had grown, but physically she looked great. She lost a lot of weight. Her skin cleared up. She long time suffered of something called lichen planus, which is a form of eczema. She looked great. And it was a real inspiration for me to sort my diet out. And I did it for a while, but not for a long time. Have you looked into diet relating to cancer?
So the one correlation that, and once again, correlation isn't causation, but in the study that I found, the one commonality that I'd heard was that cancer cells specifically feed on the sugars inside your body. Yeah. And so eliminating that was a pretty big piece of it.
The alkaline state.
Correct, getting into the alkaline state. And so I tried to put my dad on a very low sugar, low carbohydrate diet to kind of eliminate the sugar presence in his body. Admittedly, he, being someone that was very associated with the people he trusted and the doctors, they didn't recommend that. Like they just said, like, have him eat the whole grains and whatnot. Sugar, not such a big deal. And they actually recommended these kind of like Ensure drinks for him, which were loaded with sugar. That's what they recommended specifically for him. And I remember buying it and looking at it like, what the hell is this? This is basically like a cancer syrup. Start of my frustration was like, do you guys have any understanding of like how cancer reproduces? And then of course, being so late stage, he just, at some point you just felt bad for him. You want to eat anything. And he would get taken out by family and relatives and bring to a restaurant. And as you probably know from cancer patients, at some point in time, there's not much that they want to eat at all. Yeah. And ironically, what they're most driven to tends to be what the cancer wants. Yeah. And so
can of Coke,
a big can of Coke, a little pound cake and whatnot. And so when that's all that would kind of taste good to him, a lot of family would say, your days are numbered. Sure,
Yeah.
enjoy the last few days that you have. But during that time, during the first few weeks with him, I said, well, if I'm going to try this out, I'd never heard of this diet, I'll do it myself. And so I ate the same things he did, the weird kind of like, cream milkshakes and whatnot. And it just happened to be that I never looked back, because I then felt great. I felt the best that I'd ever felt. And a lot of health issues started melting away, from just the common cold and flu to having a lot of energy for when I do my like outdoor climbing excursions and whatnot. But for him, he was definitely far along the line, pretty far. And he, at this point, just kind of eat whatever he could possibly stomach. Because as you might know, foods start to change in taste. With cancer, things start to taste almost metallic, is what he would say to me a lot. And the most appealing stuff, it's almost like you've got this demon inside of you, and it's telling you what tastes good. And what it was telling him was the stuff that was worst for him.
Yeah, so my uncle also died of cancer. Well, one of those uncles, he's not actually your uncle, he's just always been around.
Friends, family. That's what we do in the Philippines. Everyone's an uncle, by the way.
Right. Yeah,
in our family. Everyone's an uncle and an aunt.
So it's my Uncle Paddy, who grew up near my dad, and he moved to the same town as us. And I remember the last week of his life, we'd just go and visit him. All he wanted was a can of Coke, just over and over again. And you could see his face light up. And it was like a similar situation. It was so late. Okay, so you've changed your diet quite significantly. What are your kind of staples? What are you having? What are you not having?
I'm having heavy cream, eggs, cauliflower, steaks, sausage, cheese.
Sounds great.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like I have no complaints. It's just like it's all the tastiest stuff that I've ever enjoyed in life without any of the guilt. And there are a few streaks of a few weeks in and out that I would eat like a dozen eggs in a day. Wow. Like to everyone's like traditional anti-advice. They'd say, no, I don't, what do you think you're doing? It's so much cholesterol, but tastes great. I love eggs. I can have them all the time. I find that the cool thing about the diet is there's a known trend that when you're kind of on ketosis that you don't get as hungry when you don't need to eat. So if there's nothing for me to eat, I can sometimes just say, well, I'll just pass. And when I'm on a flight and the food that they serve doesn't really fit, I'll say, oh, I'll just go watch a movie. And you're able to get past that hangriness.
Yeah, that's a new thing. Do you drink still alcohol?
A little.
So that's, I think, my last weakness left in this.
Got it.
Yeah,
I could hear that. It's a social thing. So I do have a little bit. I trend to prefer, ironically for keto, hard alcohol is what I trend to prefer because it's actually carb free.
Yeah, so you're okay. You're okay with a straight whiskey, right?
Whiskey soda. That's probably my favorite.
You're okay with, I think, champagne, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of champagne.
A little champagne.
I
do drink kombucha, a little bit of that. So.
Do you know Jimmy Song?
Yeah, I know of him. I've briefly interacted with him, but not a whole lot.
So he's pretty much full carnivore. The days he flies, he will usually have a fast day.
Okay.
And so what I did recently on a flight, first time ever flight over the States, I didn't drink the whole flight, which is rare. They want to give me free wine, I'll usually have it. And I didn't have the meal either because it's junk.
Yeah, usually it's junk. Yeah.
And I went through the kind of hunger pains, but I got through it. I spoke to Jimmy. He's actually done a week fast. That's
challenging for sure.
Yeah.
But I know a few people that have got into, there's something about people that get into keto that get into fasting as well. Like this intermittent to really long fasting, actually. I haven't gone down that path myself, but I can see some of the benefits like that. Just get your body to cleanse itself. Like you're not constantly digesting, but admittedly, it's not something that I've dived into at this point. And I'm not full carnivore. If anything, I just don't know if I'd enjoy it. So yeah. I still want to, like I said, I try to be balanced. And to me, it's weird because keto, when I first started, sounded extreme. Now, I've never thought of it as extreme. It feels very balanced. It's, a lot of the different flavors and foods I would like to eat. And I've analyzed, pure carnivore, and I've had talks with people that highly promote it. I got Zuko Wilcox, whatnot, hung out with him.
I was with him
yesterday. Talked about it. Oh, cool. Yeah. And I started asking myself, okay, what would my day look like? What would I eat? I'm like, I don't doubt that it's healthy at all. I just want to eat other foods. Yeah, see, I can't do it. I'm like you, but I will some days I'll have a big T-bone for lunch and I'm good for a few hours. Yeah. But, like last night when I went out for dinner, had a steak, and I said, I don't want the chips and the mushrooms. Sorry, I don't want the chips and the mashed potatoes. She said, do you want anything else? And I had the mushrooms. Yeah. Are they all right in keto? A little bit. Yeah. So there's nothing you can't eat, technically speaking, right? Yeah. You can eat grain or rice, you're fine. Yes. But it's just a matter of how much, like the macronutrients and whatnot. And so, yeah, you can have practically anything in the right quantities.
How long does it take to get into ketosis? Is it like a 2-week, 3-week?
So I would, right before I went into keto, I was already kind of doing paleo, which, has its inklings of low carb.
Yeah.
And so I may have gotten into ketosis faster than most people, but I've advocated it and I've had many friends try it out. And they typically say 2 weeks, you feel like shit.
Yeah.
And then you get the keto flu, and then you wake up and you go, oh my God, it's almost like the windshield in your car has been dirty for years, and you finally turn on the wipers, right? You suddenly see clearly now.
Right.
The rain is gone. So I never actually went through that, but I did measure. I actually have a blood tester and a measure. I'm like, oh, yep, I'm in ketosis, whatever that 1 point, whatever measurement needed to be. And then after you do the measurements over a long period of time, you kind of get a feel for, how many carbs are in different foods and how much you can take in a day. And then you don't really have to think about it much anymore.
Right. It's kind of mad, really, with all the documentaries on Netflix now about food and diet and, the understanding we have, but we still go into supermarkets with shelves, packed full of absolute crap and garbage, and we still consume it.
Yeah.
It's a wonder why.
It's a slow change.
Yeah.
It's a really slow change. And my wife's family is kind of rooted in military, right? Being from the Philippines, a lot of migration from the Philippines, not specifically my family, but a lot of others came via the military, the Navy, and whatnot. And if you think about what mentality is etched into the military, it's like rations and packaged and canned foods and whatnot, just whatever you can stick down your mouth to just give you whatever energy is necessary. Mm-hmm. And so they definitely succumb to a lot of just what you see on the grocery and just what they've been told over the years as being good enough. Like satisfies my stomach, it's good enough. Long term, I don't know what it does. And they not necessarily care. And admittedly, there's the reason for that as well is, I'm sure you've realized this, is that to be really conscious of food, what you eat, is not cheap.
Nope.
It's not cheap at all. It's actually really, it can be very expensive.
Yes and no. So I've got mixed views on that. So I did Carnival for a week, mm-hmm. and my shopping bill was exactly the same, pretty much within a few pounds of what it was when I would buy a range of things. Mm-hmm. Because in my range of things, on top of my pastas and meat, I was also having like Pringles and some chocolate and
junk and whatnot.
Yeah, like just different drinks. When I did a whole week of Carnival, I just went to the butcher's and bought, what was it, like 14 steaks or whatever. And if you buy it in bulk, and you can get a good
pretty
price.
good deal.
Yeah, you get So it was about, I don't know, so it's about £120. It was quite close. It was quite close. But I think if I was doing very good kind of like fish, veg, meat, then yes, it would be more. And I also obviously feel very sorry for families who are on low budgets. One of the Netflix documentaries, it shows a family going into a supermarket. They can't afford the broccoli. They end up, the family has a McDonald's, right? You've seen it.
I think I've seen this one. Which one was that one? God, there's a few of these documentaries now.
Food Inc. Maybe?
Food Inc. It might have been Food Inc. Yeah, with the cow in the front, right?
Yeah. And you're just like, your options for your children is it's kind of confusing how it can be cheaper. But it's obviously the economies of scale that McDonald's have.
Yeah, McDonald's has huge economies of scale. They don't have to buy the best quality ingredients and they just crank it out. So.
But I guess if everyone wanted healthy food, they could do the same very cheap.
Exactly. We have to demand healthy food. And enough of us currently don't. And plus, it's interesting because you're comparing it to going to the grocery store where you buy the raw ingredients costing more and you still have to prepare it.
Yes.
Versus going to the McDonald's and it's prepared for you and you just throw the paper in the garbage and you're kind of done. No dishes. Tastes great. Yeah, I'm not arguing taste in this entire debate, right? It's like one of those, everything that is unhealthy for you can taste perfectly great. And so the experience you had with going full carnivore, realize that you're buying the steaks yourself too as well. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the people that are on a budget, they're also on a time budget. Mm-hmm. Not only just a financial budget, but they're picking up the kids, got to drop them off, go to work, get out of work. And so if you look at what it takes to eat healthy where you don't prepare your food, that almost in every way, shape, and form is more expensive. Where you're going to a restaurant, you're getting served yourself. It's hard to find a cheap alternative in that regard.
Well, it's like I said to you when I was a vegan. The first year of it, I'd given up work. My agency had folded. I was spending time with my mum. I could go to the shops. I could buy the food. I could come home, prepare, read a book. I used to have an afternoon nap. I used to have an afternoon nap every day about 2:00. It was brilliant. And then when I went back to work, it changed. But it is a real shame that this is so expensive for people. But I don't know the answer. Like, you can't do you know what?
Yeah.
Let me do another thing I've realized recently. I don't know if you've ever seen this. Do you know about the amount of food that is thrown away just because it looks odd, like fruit and vegetables?
I don't know
Ugly
the
fruit.
amount, but I know having worked at a restaurant, how much is thrown away. Which is at times, at least we felt like we were fairly efficient, easily 30%.
Is that because it's just gone off by the time?
Yeah, by the time, because you're balancing you're basically a production line, but you don't know what you're going to sell.
No, this isn't even that. This is ugly fruit and veg.
Oh, exactly. It's not gone bad. It's just it's ugly. It doesn't look appealing.
Yeah, it's a weirdly shaped strawberry,
Yeah.
a lot of that gets thrown away. They've now started selling it in the supermarkets, and they package it. I don't know if they do that.
Do they
yet.
brand it as heirloom?
No. What do they do?
That's basically an ugly tomato, right?
No. What do they do?
They're the coolest things now at the farmer's market. Heirloom tomatoes are lumpy, weird, funny colors. They got wrinkles, dirt's caught in the middle of it.
But how dumb, right? Because that's pushing up the cost.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So with all this, so you've been through all this process. You've learned about this. This has created a deep distrust with Big Pharma and a deep distrust with the government. Mm-hmm. One of the other things I found unusual coming back and forth to America, and especially spending some time in DC, is lobbying.
Oh, yeah. The huge industry of lobbying.
So I'm pretty sure the equivalent in the UK is illegal. You cannot.
I presume so.
Yeah. And I keep talking about documentaries. I can't remember what this one was, but there was one where it showed a bunch of politicians and then it pinged above their heads how much money they received
Right,
from lobbyists. And it feels to me it's almost like you have the opportunity to pay for the regulations or the rules you want.
You're paying for the vote. So there's a really interesting video called the cardboard box reform theory.
Okay.
And it actually goes against what a lot of even Bitcoiners and cryptocurrency people want, which it proposes that to fix corruption, you need to make the vote of constituents private, where you don't know what they voted for on all the bills that pass across their desk. And the interesting theory about this is if you don't know how they voted, how do you buy it? And ironically, most people are actually saying, we want to know exactly what this person I voted for did just because I voted for him. You better do exactly what I say. Well, yeah, you think so, but are you really watching everything that he does? I guarantee you the lobbyists that are paying him are watching everything he does, but the individual isn't.
Is there any debate in the US that lobbying itself should be outlawed?
There's probably debate amongst the little guys, like the individuals, but not so much in what I'd call Congress and the big entities because there's too much money to gain. And I'll say one thing too is that it's one thing when you've got kind of the open lobbying money, but then there's also just simply the circular door between regulators and the big companies. Easily, I think it was found out that 25% of the regulators at the FDA that determined the drugs that would pass for cancer ended up in big pharma companies after their term. And so you eliminate one method and kind of another method comes around. And this is true, not just there. We complain about, for example, Lawski, having worked in a regulatory body that now gets paid by the largest companies, not just in crypto, but in banking and financial services. It's this horrible revolving door.
What he got away with was unbelievable, that guy,
Totally.
man.
Exactly. And it's not just that industry, right? They all kind of tie together. It's so similar what happens in each of these industries where you have a very close tie with big business and with government.
Well, what's the answer then? Or how does it impact you in your thinking?
Eliminate the government, eliminate the issue.
So you're one of these people who, which I've spoken to about before. I had it the other day with Eric Voorhees. So actually democracy itself is like it's a full stream. It's just, and somebody told me
I think it starts off democratic, but then it trends to that false stream.
So you're like radical libertarian. You think
I wouldn't call myself a radical libertarian. So I think the government will always exist because as people, once again, I think I'm one of those where I would love to see that utopian world that a radical libertarian, like I want to see it. But at the same time, the realist in me, especially having read books like Born to Run, thinks that humanity doesn't want to trend towards that. It just doesn't have enough mass desire to trend towards it. We're a minority. We as these libertarians are a minority. So any attempt and any technology and any push to at least shrink it as small as possible, where we can still function, is what I try to drive to. And if we can do that, and if you can't fund an FDA, then let's have several different private entities that are each independent, that people can choose to trust or not trust, evaluate what the pharmaceutical industries do. So when I worked at NVIDIA, our success or failure on every release of a graphics card was determined by about a handful of different websites that would review hardware. They were our FDA. We didn't need a government to say whether or not we made a good graphics card or not. Now, admittedly, we don't have people's lives in our hands, but it was very fair because I remember one of the sites, I can't remember which one it was. God, it's been like 20 years. But one of the sites was caught taking money from one of the manufacturers, and they went down quick and hard, really quick and hard. That news spread, and suddenly they weren't trusted, and everyone went to other sites to determine who has the fastest graphics card. It's self-regulation. It can happen. And when you have one entity and no one else can take the place of FinCEN, the FDA, then you end up with that monopoly. They're the only ones you can bribe.
Yeah, so this is really on point with the conversations I'm having at the moment. So I was with Eric Voorhees the other day discussing libertarianism, and and I was saying I really can't picture this radical libertarian world with no government. He said, but you know what? It's a pointless goal. The goal is, let's just start with less government.
Right.
Let's just go 1% less. 1% less, 1% less budget. We never get it. Every year government grows.
Yep.
And then I was up in Wyoming spending time with Caitlin Long, and I spent time with Tyler Lindholm, who's one of the politicians there. And he regards himself as a libertarian Republican or libertarian conservative. Right. And what was really interesting then is he was talking about, we're just trying to reduce the size of government. And I think it was him who was telling me there was like was it a regulator for barbers, or was that Eric? Somebody was telling me. It's like, why do you need to have a body to regulate barbers? You just don't need this.
You need a certificate to actually be a salon hairstylist.
And do you know, one of the interesting things is I wasn't even aware of libertarianism really before Bitcoin. Obviously, I'd heard of it, but not paid too much attention to it. I was just lived in a world where I'd Labour and the Conservatives in the UK. Now, I've learned a lot more about it, and, for me, a lot resonates with me. Not everything, but a lot.
Right.
But I do like this goal of less government. The problem is, it's like turkeys voting for Christmas, or lawyers wanting less regulation. It's very few politicians are going to fight for less government.
Right.
But this is where the
they're
Bitcoin
voting
comes in.
to lose a job. They're voting to lose a job is effectively what they're doing.
Yeah, but this is where Bitcoin comes in, right? This is the chance where, yes, they can tax Bitcoin, but they can't print more Bitcoin. We've seen it with the repo markets this week and previous quantitative easing. They can stimulate the markets. You can't fund.
Yep.
You can tax Bitcoin revenue, but as more people use Bitcoin, as more people enter into Bitcoin and the Bitcoin circular economy grows, we do get that natural demonetization of the state, and then they have to make choices.
They actually have to have us vote and pay taxes to fund what they want to do. And taxation is kind of double. There's kind of two ways that the government taxes. One is through inflation, one is through direct taxation. They at least lose one of those.
Yes.
And that's the one that's most hidden. It's the one that we don't really see to the degree that it actually is happening. But if they go and actually increase taxes that are more direct, we see, feel, and also vocalize potentially against it. So that is huge in and of itself. And when they want to create another entity like the FDA or FinCEN and whatnot, that's going to cost them money. And they actually really have to balance that budget. And realize, do we actually have enough money for that? And to the point where if they don't, do you even want to work for them? So one of the things is that, can we just simply brain drain the government and make it where right now government jobs are generally considered to be low paying? How long can that continue? They're low paying, but also you barely do anything there. You don't get any shit done, right? But how long can that continue if that low paying gets low and low enough because you can't print no money to pay those people? Then it comes to the point where why work there versus working in a private sector? You brain drain that entity, it will just naturally shrink. And I think that's one of the techniques to get them small, get them to become just a generally smaller entity.
Yeah, I think it's kind of exciting to watch this in real time. We're part of this. We're seeing it. It may happen, it may not. But I also find it a bit scary. I find the transition, like how bloody, how does the transition happen? What happens to business and people? Could it be like one of the darkest times ever as humanity has to shift its entire monetary system and everyone's use and perception of money to a completely different way of operating?
I've gone back and forth on on whether or not I thought that it would be very sudden and violent. I think currently I'm settled on that it doesn't have to be.
No.
It doesn't have to be sudden and violent, and that we can kind of shift our holdings, what we choose to use, what we choose to value gradually into crypto. And it can also be kind of less violent as various countries adopt it while others don't. I think we've generally trended right now to a generally less violent world, right? And that trend, I think, generally continues with technologies that connect us more with the people versus being distanced from them. Like right now, the internet has connected us more so than it ever did before, and we can relate to other societies and other people and other cultures more directly, which makes us be much more sympathetic than we were in the past for wars. And that still carries over even into the cryptocurrency world, where the people that might want to start violence in a war due to the shift are inherently more sympathetic because of that communication barrier being broken down. You could see what happens to other people. So that inherently, I think, is a key piece of it. And plus, why I also think it'll be less violent is typically that violence has been rooted in the ability to pay for the violence. And if you actually can't pay for the violence, and the people that are kind of going into power, right? In a shift, it's a shift of power. If the people that are going into power are of the generally less violent nature, then where would the violence come from in the first place?
Well, yeah, so the hope and the near change of government in Venezuela was Maduro couldn't pay the army. He had no money left. You can't pay the army, and that's what you hope. Once the army aren't being paid and they've got no money left, who's going to defend his state?
Right.
So I guess that's what you kind of hope with this. The other thing I also think about is that, say if a country like America or the UK transition to a more Bitcoin economic system, and a country like China doesn't, do you potentially become a weaker country on the international kind of playing field, and are you at risk with that? And that's something I've not got to figured out.
I think for sure you do, but every country is so aware of that. I feel like they're intimately aware of, like, okay, we need to make sure that we are not falling behind in being a major international player if this becomes relevant. And while China has made its ban on ban of Bitcoin over and over and over again, there's still a strong presence of Bitcoin in the country. And it's China's way of saying, well, let's slow it down, but not make it where everything leaves. So in case we need to pull the trigger and crank it up because this now becomes the global economy, they can. And so everyone, it's like what I've heard so many times. It's that weapon that you want, but you kind of shoot yourself in the foot at the same time. And so I'm not worried that a country will fall behind and suddenly be up in war because they've kind of lost the battle. And plus, if they really did, they also would lose a lot of economic resources necessary to wage war and actually impart any of the violence. So they're straddling really tough boundaries. I wouldn't want to be in high levels of government in any major countries that have a lot to lose because of Bitcoin, because then you're in a rock and a hard place for sure.
Do you think there's any risk that a movement to Bitcoin, a more Bitcoin-based economic structure, is a little bit discriminatory in parts of the world where essentially you need technology to be part of this?
Admittedly, I think today it is. I was talking to some folks in Venezuela, and they said that the average phone there, actually the average duration that you have a phone is 3 months. By then, it's stolen.
Oh, God. Well, the other problem you have in Venezuela is you have blackouts.
You have blackouts.
If you have a blackout and your phone's gone, and you can't charge it,
how do you charge?
Then you can't use your Bitcoin. And that is a problem.
No, for sure that is a problem. So I do have one theory about Bitcoin when you don't have internet access. So it sounds almost blasphemous to say, but imagine a world where you actually still have paper money that is backed by Bitcoin.
Well, that's what I imagine, actually. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
I don't think it's a bad thing, but the initial gut reaction is that's a bad thing because that's what we did with gold, right? We took gold, we turned it into paper, we backed it, and then eventually the paper got unpegged from gold. However, the big difference here is that paper was in every way, shape, and form way more efficient than the gold. Like, it was way more convenient. You didn't have to carry heavy metal around. You could have large denominations of paper. You can even, checks are a form of paper. You just write the amount that you want to send. And the entire economy then became dependent on paper to to the point where you just never needed or used gold. In the analogy with Bitcoin, you would only be using this paper in regions that don't have internet. Like say you're going to a national park, you're going to Yosemite, right, in the middle of the Serengeti in Africa, and sure, there's no internet there. On the way there, in the last place that has internet, you go to an ATM and convert your Bitcoin into Bitcoin paper.
Yeah.
And then you go in there, you transact as you need, you come out, and you turn it right back into digital Bitcoin.
I don't think that's that controversial.
No. Well, if you take the headline, let's print paper backed in Bitcoin, right? That's controversial. But when you really ask yourself, will you give the entity that creates the paper much power? As long as you don't give that entity that creates the paper, the payment method, you don't give the payment method much power, then they can't unpeg. That I think is the key piece.
And the other thing is the Bitcoin is still decentralized. Gold, under the gold standard, it was still semi-centralized under the government control.
The gold standard of pegging a piece of paper with gold was centralized. And in a way, pegging a piece of paper with Bitcoin would also be centralized. Really, it's not about being centralized or decentralized with the paper. It's how much power are you giving that piece of paper? How much of the economy is dependent on that paper? If barely any of the economy is dependent on that paper, then you have no power to unpeg it.
That's true.
But if a lot of the economy is dependent on that paper, say we went global paper backed by Bitcoin, and we still used this Bitcoin backed dollar all over the world, and it was only the big banks that held Bitcoin, that is dangerous. That I would say we need actual people holding and transacting with Bitcoin. Otherwise, the thing that pegs it just unpegs over time.
Right. Do you know what? I've just remembered what we were arguing about in Hong Kong. I was trying to be a Bitcoin maximalist.
Oh, I'm sure that would have. I'm sure we were arguing about something along those lines. Then, if you're arguing about maximalism, then I just be more of a. I'm still I'm Bitcoin majoralist. I guess that's even a word. I'm majority own holding.
Rationalist.
Even more than rationalist, like majorist. If that's even worse. Like that's still a vast majority of my holdings and belief. But I'm open to the ideas of many other projects and supporting those ideas.
So if you look at where we are with Bitcoin now, look at the growth of the technology, use cases, kind of where do you feel where we are? Because you've been in this for a long time.
So where we are today, I mean, it's the same rhetoric you hear. It's a store of value. It has the potential to be a global settlement layer, a global currency that crosses nations and whatnot. But the technology of being able to make it a peer-to-peer payment mechanism is still very young and uncertain. And so there's several attempts at it, from anything from Lightning Network to side chains, but all of them haven't achieved what at least I feel are that high level of confidence that yes, this is how we are going to solve that problem. And I personally look at it very carefully. I get into hours of discussions with a lot of people that are working on those projects to find out, okay, what are the hiccups and what are the challenges? But in the end, I fundamentally believe that does need to be solved for Bitcoin to be successful. I don't subscribe to the rhetoric that it's okay with it just simply being a store of value. Like I want Bitcoin to be a payment mechanism as well.
No, I agree. I completely agree. And so I've struggled with Lightning. I like it when I have used it, and I've, for example, the times when I've been tipped, people tip me in Lightning, right? And I transfer it, it's instantly there in my wallet. Yeah. Whereas, if I'm waiting for a payment and I think it's going to take about an hour, it's still on my mind. I'm still waiting.
Like, is it there? Is it there?
I just want to confirm it's there. Yeah. I know I see it there, but I just want it fully confirmed. There are, I think, some very interesting things happening with it. The recent announcement by Jack Mallers with Zap, where you can buy instantly. You've got a fiat on-ramp to instant sats in the wallet, which I think is very interesting, very cool. I don't know how he does it yet, but I think that's very cool. One of my controversial opinions that I hold is that Bitcoin and Lightning sats feel like two separate currencies, even though it's the same.
Oh my God! Did you just say that?
I know. I'm going to get I'm going to get killed for this.
Do you know that? Okay, so I'm sure have you had Udi on your show?
Yes, I have had Udi
on your show. So I've been on a show with him, and I'm notorious as being the guy that called Lightning an altcoin.
Right. I did not call it that.
So, it was the discussion of will we implement it and the difficulty of implementing it. And my co-founder said it's as difficult, if not significantly harder than implementing an altcoin. And it's going to feel like one inside of the app. Like it won't feel like Bitcoin. You'll have a Bitcoin balance, you'll have a Lightning balance, and they'll be very, very different. And we tried to determine whether or not you could hide it. You can hide the complexity of your on-chain Bitcoin versus your Lightning balance. And we couldn't settle on figuring out a way to do that. And that's why I said this is going to feel like an altcoin. It's going to be like a separate balance. And in some ways, there's a potential for it to even have a different value, like not being completely the same value as Bitcoin. And then we see this even in the dollar. The dollar sitting in different accounts has different value to people. It's not 100% fungible across the board.
Well, I've just been up to Cambodia and Vietnam. When I was in Cambodia, I was using the dollar because they don't want the local currency.
Oh, really?
And
Ironic.
they won't accept in shops and restaurants any note with a rip because it's treated as a lower value.
Lower value,
Yeah.
right.
So that happens in the real world as well.
It totally does. And the reason why that debate sparked so much kind of controversy is like I made the statement that, yes, there's currency and then there's a payment mechanism. And Lightning is the same currency as Bitcoin, but with a different payment mechanism. But ironically, the advent of cryptocurrency, the advent of Bitcoin is the very first time ever in the world that we actually had a currency with its own payment mechanism. So therefore, the currency in and of itself started to become defined by the fact that it had one, that it had its own payment mechanism. So if you rip that payment mechanism to two, you almost 50% have a different currency. Right? In before Bitcoin, gold, shells, whatever it is, chickens, the only payment mechanism that was inherently built into it was literally the physical air between you and the person receiving it. That's the only payment mechanism it ever had.
So
And
how
then-
much shit did you get for calling it an altcoin?
Do you remember that message I think you said earlier about like, your day just gets zapped and
Yeah.
you just feel like drained? That was a weekend. I think it was like a Saturday or Sunday.
Because people treat it like an attack. And
Yeah.
I personally wouldn't call it an altcoin, but it just feels like there's
It's not an altcoin. It's just it
feels different.
It feels different in the experience of holding its balance and sending and transacting it.
It's like parallel Bitcoin experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I've got Lightning sats and I've got Bitcoin. Everything in Lightning is pretty much referred to as sats these days as well.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but I also have Bitcoin sats.
Right.
But the fact that I can't transition between the two of them instantly.
Not instantly, not with ease, yeah.
Yeah, but because the on and off ramp between the two, that's kind of an unusual experience.
It is a bit. To argue against this, to take my opponent's argument, they say, well, that's what dollars are. You have dollars in your PayPal account, you have dollars in your bank account. You don't easily convert the two of them across this boundary. And you have dollars as paper. It's hard to go from paper to your bank, blah, blah, blah. There's this friction to go through these three different payment mechanisms, and that is true. But once again, the difference
But they're different mediums, aren't they? You one's cash hand to hand, one's through a card. This can be both in the same app together next to each other.
In the same app. And in some ways, you might actually have that in, for example, a stock trading app where you have a balance in your bank account on E-Trade, and then you have a balance in your your trading account on E-Trade. And there's a little bit of friction to go back and forth between the two. And there's some things you can and can't do with each one of those balances. So there's this analogy you can make to say, no, they're really the same currency. They don't feel different. But I think the inherent reason why it feels a little bit different is because this is the one currency that when it was born had its own payment mechanism. And we've created a new one. That's fair. It's a new one and it works. But our mind is so associated with that payment mechanism that as soon as you create another one, it feels kind of like a different currency.
Well, think about an onboarding of a new person, right? A friend before, you say, I need to get into Bitcoin. And they say, okay, why? And you explain to them, they say, okay, I'm interested. So you say, go to Coinbase and just buy $50. So they put their credit card in and they buy it. Not too much of a great experience yet. They've just bought some, they see a balance. Then you've got that eureka moment. You say, okay, send some to a wallet. Let's get your hardware wallet. And the moment they see it move, that's kind of like, okay, that's a wow moment.
Right.
If you've got somebody coming in now and you do the same experience and they're like, oh, well, what's this Lightning thing? You say, well, so it's like Bitcoin, but it's faster and you have to open a channel. So you need to download this wallet and then you can send it to there and convert it into Lightning sats. Like the whole
You get incoming balance first, incoming capacity first.
Yeah. It's a massive step change. Now, I know some of this is being abstracted away, but even when you abstract some of this away, do we think we'll get to the point where we'll have a wallet where we'll just have Bitcoin and sats, and when we spend it, the wallet will make the decision whether to use Lightning or not? And I mean,
that's the holy grail.
Yeah, if that happens, great.
Exactly. That's the holy grail that I'm keeping a close eye on. And like I said, I just got out of, I think, probably 2 to 3 hours of conversation with various people working on Lightning at the Scaling Bitcoin event over in Tel Aviv. And I learned of some, a few different advancements. Not there yet, but I'm hoping we get there because I do firmly believe that it is important.
Yeah, I agree.
We need to get there. Not there yet, but that would make it where a lot of the rest of the ecosystem becomes far less competitive, admittedly. That would make a fundamental shift in that. But I just have to keep a close eye on it. I'm not like core developer Lightning type of person, so all I can do is talk with the smart technologists. I am a developer, but that's not what my expertise is in. So excited to get there. Not there yet. Keep an ear close to the ground, and hope for Bitcoin to the moon when we hit that cool tech that makes it fully mass adoptable.
Do you hold any other controversial opinions?
Any other controversial opinions? That was definitely one of the big ones.
I've got another one, but I'm going to see if you've got one.
I think we kind of covered the fact that maybe you feel like it's not that controversial, which is I say, yeah, Bitcoin, I'll make it more clickbaity. I'll take the opinion I just said, make it more clickbaity.
No, don't.
Bitcoin will not succeed unless it does figure out how to be a payment mechanism.
I don't think that's too controversial. There are other people who believe that as well.
There's a few. But I feel like if I put that on Twitter, you'll realize it's controversial.
Yeah, okay. I'll tell you the other one I hold, and I really hope Jack isn't listening to this, but I don't mind a small amount of my Bitcoin in a custodial wallet.
So that's one that I'll actually fight against. Okay. I'll fight against that because that becomes the slippery slope.
So, which I've heard the argument, I understand it.
Yeah, and we did that with gold, right? I'm going to hold a little bit in the bank and use paper because paper is more fast and convenient and easier to deal with. Mm-hmm. And then what about the people that their transaction volume is more than 80% of what they hold? You get a paycheck, say $5,000 in a month, but you need to spend about $4,000 of it. And so where are you going to hold that? In your custodial wallet, if that's how you're going to transact. And then at some point, why am I even bothering to hold that other small amount in the non-custodial? Because there's so much friction to go back and forth between the two.
Put it in my Bitcoin bank.
and so remember the problem with creating paper Bitcoin that then it gets used into areas that don't have any internet, where that's actually not too big of a problem because you didn't give paper that much control. Mm-hmm. If the transaction medium becomes the custodial solution, then what you've done is you've created the paper backing of Bitcoin that now has a lot of power.
Okay.
If that's how we transact Bitcoin is through the custodial services, then now the non-custodial way of transacting Bitcoin doesn't have a lot of power, which means that the physical transfer of gold has no power. No one's using it. No one's accepting it. Mm-hmm. They're only accepting the paper version of gold. Now we've lost every benefit to Bitcoin, including even its inflation resistance, I would argue, mm-hmm. because how do you know how much really exists? So while it might sound like convenient, it's only a small amount, that's such a relative term that it's just a small amount.
Yeah.
And so I've said I'm not a Marxist, I'm pretty balanced, I'm a Libra and whatnot. I have said though that I'm a hold your funds, hold your keys maximalist.
Yeah, do you know what? I haven't heard it explained to me in that way. So I'd always consider it from the perspective of, just get $50-$100 in there. I don't have to open a channel.
Yeah,
it moves very quickly. That was where I'd come from, but you hadn't explained it to me like that. The slippery slope is a very good point, actually. Yeah. It's like defend the core principles of Bitcoin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the piece that I hold very strongly. That's why I got into the space, was to make it where people really don't have to go through the custodial services, whether to buy or hold or send and receive. If we lose that, I fundamentally think we lose. I mean, you can kind of define success of Bitcoin in multiple ways, depending on how you care about it. Global digital economy, accessible from anywhere in the world, inflationary resistance, store of value, whatnot, accessibility. But I feel like fundamentally all of those will go away if we go down the slippery slope of custodial services for, maybe not so much for the high frequency traders. Yeah, leave the traders on mm-hmm. the exchanges, but for the mass market, for the consumers. So yeah, that's why we even tried to bother building Lightning. Why bother building Lightning if we're just going to say, stick it on a custodian?
All right, man. Well, that feels like a good place to start coming to an end. Be only fair to give you a little chance to tell you what you're working on, what's coming up.
Oh, what's coming up? So yeah, our company Edge is a non-custodial exchange. Lets you buy, sell, and trade. Like you had mentioned, when you refer someone to go get some Bitcoin, send them to Coinbase, but then always have them transfer it out. At Edge, they can buy, sell, and trade from a bunch of different places around the world using multiple different payment methods. And when they buy Bitcoin, it always is already transferred out. It never sits with a custodian. There's no two-step process. So, and we're about to even launch being able to do that in a very large portion of the world with no KYC from your bank account.
Okay.
Huge.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where are you going to be hiding out?
Right in the open. We'll have big press and media about that because it's actually fully compliant. So I think this is what we do because we're able to partner with really good best in breed kind of back-end exchange partners around the world. That they're the boots in the ground in the different regions. We're not experts at banking and regulation. We're software, we're key management, but got great partners that can offer great options around the world. So we'd love to be a solution for those people that keep recommending to buy with a exchange and then transfer it out, do it all in one.
All right, and how do people find out more about this?
So edge.app, that's our website.
Edge.app?
Yep, edge.app, check it out. It's available all around the world.
All right,
love to hear your feedback.
This is great. I really enjoyed this, man. Thanks for coming on.
It was a good time. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, so what did you think of that one? Did you enjoy that chat with Paul? I really, really did. I do hope this gets a bunch of downloads because I think it's a very, very interesting interview and one I love recording. I think Paul's pretty cool. I actually first met him in Hong Kong last year. We had a bit of a debate over dinner discussing Bitcoin versus shitcoins. But yeah, it was great to sit down with him and record an interview. I like thinking about time preference. Just being aware of it and considering how decisions will affect your life is pretty powerful stuff. For me, it's just another unexpected consequence of going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. You start with Bitcoin just being like this magic internet money, then it ends up becoming so many other things that affect your life, which is really very cool. Anyway, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. If you've got any feedback, you can reach me at hello@whatbitcoindid.com. Also, if you want to support the show, there's a load of things you can do. Just head over to my website. It's whatbitcoindid.com. Click on the support section, whether it's a review, whether it's sign up to be a patron, whatever you do, it's all up there. As I said, I've got a couple more days here in LA before I head to San Francisco, and then I'm going to be heading to New York for the Human Rights Foundation Freedom Forum. If you've got any questions, do reach out to me, and also please do check out my other show, Defiance.